Well, that's not the way we're supposed to end up this day.
Oh?
Got a mess.
Every once in a while, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all those other social media things can pose an interesting challenge. And that is when you're doing little videos and clips and that sort of thing on the fly, off the cuff, you can say things that may have unforeseen consequences. The video that we made about the shutting the engine down for real the other day, after we landed, we hadn't figured out really what the problem was. And I'd made some comments. And one of those comments was that on the way out from back east, we had a little teeny bit of oil streakage. It was nothing more than the cork rocker cover gaskets that were a little loose. That got taken care of. But when we were out on our flight, what we didn't know was the dipsticks in the cockpit, meaning me, the instructor, mostly me, the instructor, but my client who didn't latch down the oil dipstick after putting some oil in. And as you can see, this dipstick has a cam type lock as a ring, and you pull up on that little ring and it takes the dipstick out of its detent and unlocks it. You can pull it up. But if you're not careful and don't snap it back down into its holder, it can work its way out, and that's what happened. Now, unlike the U2A engines, like the ones in 11111, which has a screw-in cap, this just is a mechanical lock that's just basically the O-ring going into a little bit of a detent. So you have to really be careful with that. It can happen to anybody, but that's what the cause of the oil leak was. But what happened, and I owe Joel Stout a huge apology, because there was a bunch of reading between the lines from some of the people that looked at it, and a very interesting sequence of events that I would have never thought about, and that is that people were looking at the tail number. Oh, where did this airplane come from? Oh, it came from Capital City. Oh, it must be one of Joel's airplanes. And it was. And then my implication, or perceived implication, doesn't matter perceived or not, perception's reality sometimes, was that Joel had done something wrong. And that was the farthest thing from the truth. What went wrong were the dipsticks who didn't put the dipstick in. So as a result of that, Joel's phone blew up, literally, while they were off at the lake with their family enjoying a nice quiet weekend. Joel had no idea what was going on. He was worried that, maybe there was a crash or something like that, so it really freaked him out, which again, I'm just totally apologetic for. Had no idea that was going to happen. So anyway, he and I finally got to talk and got all that stuff worked out and figured out some things that would be better to do next time. And one of the things I didn't think about is when we got back on the ground, I didn't know what was going on when I made the comment about the oil fitting on the oil cooler. And it would have been much better if I had actually videoed when we actually discovered that, when we pulled the cowling off. And that would have been more fun. But in the heat of the moment, a little bit of adrenaline still going. I didn't think of doing that, but I am a neophyte YouTuber and not the best cinematographer in the world. So again, sincere apologies to Joel. Joel's outfit, Juliet Delta Aviation at Capital City, in my opinion, is one of the best. And I'm always sending praises to what they're doing, because they've always been great. And they're really the Aerostar of the East. I wouldn't send my airplane anywhere else other than either Aerostar out in Coeur d'Alene or Juliet Delta Aviation. They really are really good. But anyway, the other part of this story is I was asked a few questions about what actually transpired. What was the thought process when all this went on? So the flight started out as a normal training flight. It was the first flight that we'd done after flying the airplane back from Capital City. And really, that whole trip was uneventful. The airplane had not been flown for quite a few years. It had been getting work done, avionics work done, and I think in one of the other videos, Mohammed said something about one year was having a baby, and that was one of the avionics packages, and then another year had another baby, another avionics package, all during COVID. So it did get delayed, but really had no problems with it. The airplane ran great. There were no issues, virtually no squawks, nothing after coming out of Joel's shop. So anyway, the flight started like any other training flight. On the ground, prepping for what we're going to do, the maneuvers that we were going to do. And even though we've been flying for 15 hours coming back to the west, sitting in the left seat and doing a takeoff and a landing every 3 hours isn't the same as the normal training, where we're doing a lot of takeoffs and landings. We're doing all the air work, the stalls, steep turns, single engine work, and all that kind of thing. So we got out there, we were doing all of those. Slow flight, steep turns, 60-degree bank turns, stalls, stall recovery without power, stall recovery with power, go-arounds, slowing the airplane down, speeding up, landing configuration, all of that basics. We were probably an hour into that, maybe a little bit less. Mohammed even mentioned that he was probably reaching his saturation point, and I kind of could tell that he was getting a little tired. So I said, hey, okay, let's go land over at Port Angeles, which is out on the Straits of Juan de Fuca, a real pretty airport, and a great spot to do some takeoff and landing training because it's flat on both ends and pretty much at sea level and not a lot of traffic. So as we turned to go out there, both of us kind of looked out. We're kind of looking at clearing the area and looking at stuff, and noticed that, oh, that oil's back up on the front left part of the cowling on the right engine. And I looked back a little further. No, that's not that little teeny drip of oil. That's a lot of oil. Looked at the gauges. We did not get a warning, which you would normally get if you dropped below red line, which I seem to remember is 25 pounds oil pressure, and never got that. So it never got down that far. But anyway, we saw the oil, looked at the gauges, and oh, the oil pressure is low. It had come down, and it had come down pretty quick. So we said, well, probably ought to go back to Payne Field. Nope, wait a minute. We got an airport right there. We're going to land. We're losing oil. This engine's going to get caged. So just went through a quick, normal power up, clean up, identify, verify, feather. Didn't need to power up, but went ahead and did that. Engine feathered normally. Wasn't really a stressful thing. I do this all the time in training and have a system set up where we can go out and actually feather the engine as if it was real by doing a missed approach, but up at 5,000 feet, and shut the engine down and go do some one engine inoperative maneuvers. So caged it, and then went through the securing checklist. All this was taking place very quickly because we were descending to go into the pattern at Port Angeles. So when we shut it down, we were probably at maybe 3 miles out on a modified 45, and went in and landed uneventfully. I chose to take the airplane and fly this as opposed to talking Mohammed through it. He was glad I did. And he said he had reached his point of saturation, so it was probably a safer thing. And he told me later, he says, I learned more from watching you go through that process than I probably would have trying to do it myself because of the stress level that I was under. So after we landed, before we landed, both of us were sharing the load a little bit. So he was calling traffic, he was on the radio, watching out for things. I was monitoring what was going on, airspeeds and that sort of thing, so that we're not getting too slow or anything. So the whole pattern, if you want to call it that, because it was more of a modified left base entry to the runway, was pretty normal. With one engine, I typically fly it right at 20, just above blue line at 117. And we did lower the flaps to 20 degrees, left them there. Gear stayed up until we had the field made. We were on a high left base. Dropped the gear down, checked the lights, and went ahead and pretty much did a normal landing, which the Aerostar does very nicely if you don't drag it in. And that's where people get into trouble, is they try to drag the thing in with one engine, gears down, flaps are at 20. 700 does okay doing that, but 601P or 600, you're going to get yourself in trouble in a hurry trying to do that with the engine out. So after the landing, the line guys that were there at the little FBO, which were wonderful, it's Wright Brothers Aviation, RITE, at Port Angeles. Mechanic came out, and I had met him before. His name's John, and super helpful. We cleaned the airplane up first. We got a squirt bottle of solvent out there and wiped it all down because it had dumped oil everywhere. Got it all cleaned up, took the cowling off, and John's over there, and because I'm thinking we had something up in the front left, but as Joel pointed out too, if a fitting had come off or you broke a hose, you're going to dump the oil out a lot faster than what happened to us. So he comes over, we pull it off, and he looks up there and says, "There's your problem," and the dipstick was sticking up. I wish I'd videoed that. That would have been the best thing. It would have been a much better lessons learned kind of thing than causing a firestorm with poor Joel getting calls about how terrible his maintenance must be. But as I said again, it's top notch. You cannot go wrong. I mean, I wouldn't go anywhere else. So anyway, it took a while to get it all cleaned up. Once we did, we put 4 quarts of oil in. So we had started out with a little bit more than 9, probably about 9.5 quarts of oil. The oil was still registering on the dipstick at about 5.5 quarts. The engine is, according to the light combing manual, it'll run at 2 3/4 quarts of oil. That's the minimum safe level of oil to run that engine in. So there's no worry about hurting the engine or anything like that in this particular case, and that's the reason we shut it down. So got it all cleaned up, cowled up, fired it up. And if you got an engine that starts up really easy, you can start it feathered. I checked with Aerostar on that, and it's not a big issue. Started right up, even hot. So I ran it for a little bit. We're still getting a little bit of residual smoke because there was still some oil back in the area where the turbos were. So we pulled the cowling all off again and let it cool down and sprayed it down with some more Stoddard solvent and solved that problem. Flew home, put the airplane to bed, and put a video out a little bit too early. So anyway, again, sincere apologies to Joel Stout and all the guys that were calling him and worried about what was going on. It was a total mess up on my part, putting something out without really thinking about the unforeseen consequences of making a comment that could be taken the wrong way. So with that, we're going to end this one, and we'll do some more flying a little bit later, and not today, because Mohammed went off and took a vacation. I think he needed it. After all that, I think I need one too. Anyway, hey, let's go flying.